So, well, what we did till now is the understanding of how, from a traditional perspective, top managers can take decisions. And what we have seen is that we have basically three key determinants of a company's competitive advantage, and these determinants are related to the available resources within a company, resources which are usually finalized in competences, which are relevant for deploying activities. Basically, we can act at these three levels in order to take effective strategic decisions. And as we have seen, according to a traditional Porter's perspective, we can identify a decisional space consisting of basically three options: cost leadership, differentiation, and focalization. Focalization addresses market niches, so a smaller share of the whole market, and focalization can be related to costs or differentiation. Well, this is, as we said several times, a quite traditional perspective. Why we are saying that this is a quite traditional perspective? Because it assumes that I can make the difference if I'm able basically to work on the upstream steps of a supply chain. So if I'm able to act on my internal configuration, working on resources, competency, activities, or if I'm able to manage effectively relations with suppliers and other stakeholders. So, in some way, the limits that we can identify here are the following. First, industry. The structure of a specific industry strongly affects the available levers of companies. This is, for example, very well clarified by the 5 forces competitive model that we have already introduced. So, one of the main issues is industry. Industry affects the company's competitive positioning. Second, and very important aspect, it assumes a clear focus on upstream steps of the supply chain. And in some way, what we can say is that all these approaches assume that efficiency and effectiveness associated to the core product output, that is the product, can make the difference. Well, are these assumptions still true, or can explain everything? Given the complexity and the turbulence of the market context that we pointed out several times, we are quite confident in saying that the answer is no. Such levers are not enough to explain, to identify feasible and sustainable determinants of a company's competitive advantage. In other words, we have to look elsewhere. We have to introduce a new perspective. And now my assumption is to try to introduce you such a new perspective within the broad strategic literature, trying to clarify whether we can figure out, we can define new determinants of a company's competitive advantage. So, companies in some way have been, over the last decades, obsessed, very much stressed, as far as the objective of building a sustainable competitive advantage. And the dominant idea is exactly the one I mentioned before. A competitive advantage sustainable in the long run. What we can say is that, first of all, we cannot think in terms of an advantage, and a single advantage, which can be sustained and maintained as such in the long term. So we have to admit the issue of transient competitive advantage. That is to say, in a dynamic environment, I have to continuously update the key determinants, explaining why I want to be seen as different from the others as far as my target market is concerned. I have to identify continuously new sources which explain my distinctive value proposition. So we must think in terms of transient competitive advantage. And a company-centric approach, an efficiency-driven approach like this, assumes that the center of gravity of our strategic thinking is the company's internal configuration. But the key question is this center of gravity still sustainable? So everything can be explained in the light of what we can do by acting internally within the companies in terms of resources, competencies, and activities. Well, here it comes a new emerging trend in the strategic literature, which is the trend which leads top managers to shift from a company-centric perspective to a customer-centric perspective. In some way, what we want to introduce is that if we want to figure out interesting levers of competitive advantage, we should not simply think in terms of company, but we should think and we should look at customers. And it's working at the customer level when we can try to imagine interesting, attractive sources of competitive advantage. So, the competitive advantage in this perspective moves from the upstream phases to the downstream ones of the supply chain. It's a big shift. It's a big shift because if you think in terms of a traditional and even current strategic mindset of companies, is very often technology-centric. Several companies have been born and have grown according to the exploitation over time of a key technology. And basically, top managers are technicians. Now, the big paradigm shift is that we ask top managers to look at customers also. A totally new body of knowledge, a totally new set of competencies are necessary. And in some way, this means that marketing becomes a crucial aspect of a company's life. So the boundaries between strategy and marketing blur. Strategy and marketing converge, just in the light of the issue that the source of competitive advantage goes downstream in the value chain. So upstream value is in some way a successful strategy, mostly in the past, looking to production and products. Why looking upstream in the supply chain was profitable, was interesting in the past? Well, basically, the markets and competitive arenas were more simple, were simpler. Levels of market sophistication were lower. So, Ford was able to achieve a significant leadership cost strategy by deploying a very well-sound program aimed at economies of scale and economies of experience. Walmart, the biggest retailer in the world, $300 billion turnover, was able to characterize its distinctive positioning throughout its unique capability of setting up very effective procurement policies and a very effective logistics system. De Beers, the jewelry company, was able to achieve a distinctive positioning because of its level of vertical integration. So in the light of the portfolio of activities included within the company's boundaries. De Beers, as a matter of fact, had and has till nowadays mining activity, so it collects raw material, is able to transform it into jewels, and then it has points of sale. So it's an example of fully vertically integrated company. So, if you want to look downstream, what we have to do? I would start with an issue which is quite typical for you, not for you, whenever you will graduate yourself at Politecnico di Milano. And look at the classical mindset of individuals, of businessmen, assuming that we are in a cocktail party. And what is the most typical question during a cocktail party? Well, it's a long time that I don't meet you or you, and I ask you, what business are you in? Where do you work now? For what company are you working now? Usually, the answer qualifies the center of gravity of the individual and hence of the company. You usually answer trying to explain to your peer that you are in a specific business and, of course, qualifying what you believe is the most important part of your business. In other words, your mindset is directed toward the center of gravity of that business and where all the attention is concentrated. Well, but basically, you usually answer pointing out, well, I'm in the chemical business. I'm in the fast-moving consumer good business. You usually qualify, for instance, the type of product you achieve. But this center of gravity, as we were referring, is not sustainable nowadays. So, what we have to consider is that it's more and more difficult to find out relevant levers of competitive advantage if we look at the upstream phases of the supply chain. Why? Commoditization of products. It's very easy to competitors to imitate myself as far as specific production technologies are concerned and our specific product features are concerned. I can outsource a part of the activity. Or, in other cases, we should consider that product life cycles are so short that it's very hard to imagine that I'm able to pay back investments specifically addressed at the product level. So, in this new scenario, value is created throughout a company's capability to effectively manage interactions with its customer base. So in some way, now we are saying that I can able to sustain, to identify and sustain a strategic differentiating point if I know very well and I'm able to impact on the marketplace. So the marketplace becomes the center of gravity of a company nowadays, which in some way points out again the relevance played by intangible features with respect to tangible ones. And it is at this level that we fully understand how important it is to assume a customer-centric perspective. Well, and let's try to better understand this paradigm shift from a company-centric to a customer-centric perspective, going back to a very old rule, which is the rule in some way suggested by what Mr. Arkwright did. Who was Arkwright? He was a man who started his career in 17th century as a barber in the English Midlands. But he was very clever since he developed a totally new factory system. Did he invented something new? No. He was able to combine new, already existing technologies under one roof in a unique place. So his inventiveness was related to matching together different types of machine of the textile industry. So cotton spinning and weaving combined together in order to achieve a totally new objective for that period. And that objective was large volumes of sale. So Arkwright was the first to introduce the paradigm of economies of scale exploitation. Combining under one roof those technologies, I can reduce production costs and I can reduce lead times of production. And so I can fully exploit economies of scale and economies of learning. And as a result, 100 years later than from this first experiment, cost of making cotton reduced of 19 times. 19 times. An incredible breakthrough. And it was the clear example of mass production. So, of a truly and effective exploitation of a company-centric perspective, coming from a clear understanding of the resource base available. So, all the money and investments within a mass production paradigm are devoted to improve facilities, technological equipment, the production level, and so far, so forth. At that time, in order to allow companies to continuously increase their turnover, appeared the issue of setting up also a marketing budget. A marketing budget for doing what? For pushing sales. So it's the time where advertising programs appear. I advertise, I push, I promote throughout sales agents in order to maximize volumes of sales and hence to be able to fully exploit economies of scale. So, during the 19th century, it emerged, let me say, a combined perspective matching together production, the company's internal configuration, and the market. But as far as the marketplace is concerned, mainly to push sales and hence production. So scale became the core objective of everything. And let me say, the obsession of every top manager was how much of this stuff we can sell. How much of this stuff we can sell. What's your comment about this sentence? Or anybody else? What does this sentence point out? You. Oh. Yeah.
That they don't look at profit.
I mean, for sure they want to sell to make profits, but how much of this stuff we can sell?
They don't look at the product.
It points out that they have no interest in knowing exactly what the customers want as long as they buy what they are selling. So they do not care about nurturing the market and the customers into a coordinated production. They just want to sell what they do.
I want to just sell. I don't spend my time and my effort to study the market and to understand what are the needs of the market, of my customer base. My perspective is totally inward oriented. So, my backward is to the market and I look to my company. What I'm able to do? Well, I'm strong in this. I have to sell this. Of course, you fully understand that such an attitude can be successfully sustained till the level of marketing complexity remains low. In the 20th century, and above all in the last few decades, what happened is that the level of customer sophistication, the complexity of the marketplace, grew a lot. So such an approach has reduced significantly its relevance. And basically, what we have now to consider is that if I don't understand what my customers look for, it may often happen that I'm not able to sell anything. And the content of my offer consists of product, service, and an integrated system of interactions. That is to say, my proposition consists of an attractive customer experience. In some way, this means that the role played by production will be played in the next future by the marketing machine. The marketing machine becomes a crucial component of a company's engine, because what we are saying here is that we have to move our attention, or we have to combine our attention to production and customer interactions. So, the marketing machine is equally important than the production machine. So basically, assuming that the customer is my center of gravity, my obsession, my goal should be this one. What else do our customer need? Not what stuff, but what else do our customer need? So now I move my back, I look very carefully to the market. That is to say, I have to study very carefully the market environment, purchase processes, key components of customers' decision making. So in some way, the internet economy, the progressive expansion of digital and of information and communication technologies have greatly contributed to make the marketplace more complex, giving to individuals and business clients much more power than in the past, letting them to become more and more informed, and hence leading companies to very carefully consider what my target needs, and how effectively I can arrange my interactions throughout different channels with my customer base. Well, taking into account, as we already said in the past, that a great part of production cost, of the overall product cost, are not related to production. Here we have the example, an example of a drug, of a pill. Well, quite strong. Less than 1% of product cost related to comes from production. 99% of the product cost derives from other components. What are the other components? What are? Marketing. Then? R&D. You know very well that R&D is time-consuming and money-absorbing in the drug industry. So, if a large portion of my value comes from downstream, it's in that direction that I have to focus my efforts and my attention. If we go to the cosmetic industry, it often happens that production players are the same for several brands, because production doesn't make the difference. The difference is, of course, the bill of materials assigned to that supplier, but packaging and marketing. And, of course, the format of retail. Okay? So, let's see another example qualifying that the value shifts downstream. And let's take the example of a can of Coke, called Coca-Cola in Italy. The can of Coke. Well, we can say that there's a very simple example showing us, and it's related to your experience, that the value attributed to a specific Coke is not related to the Coke itself. Why? Well, let's take the example of a consumer going to a supermarket and buying a pack of Cokes. The pack might be priced $6, $7, $8, whatever you can imagine. But the unitary cost of a can is 30 cents, 50 cents. Depends on the country, depends on the market you are, okay. But basically, it's quite low. Same product, different situation. The same customer next day goes in a park for running. It's a very hot day. He or she runs a lot, and he or she becomes very thirsty. But it finds an automated machine. And the same guy buys the Coke at $2. So 8 times the price of the previous day for the same product. But what makes the difference? What makes the difference? What?
The experience, the situation.
The situation, the experience. That is to say, the premium price, the accepted premium price, is because the customer attributes a specific value to have that a Coke at that specific time, in that specific place, whenever I'm thirsty. 1 hour later, that Coke has a much lower value for me because I have drank something else if I didn't find a Coke. So, value comes not simply from what, from the object, but also from how. I'm available to associate a different value to the same product, depending on the context, on the situation I am. So, customer value is not simply the price which synthesizes customer value, is not simply the result of the quality of a product, of the basic features of a product, but is the result of the features of a product plus how the product is delivered in a timely, in a consistent way according to specific needs of the individual. But devoting our attention to the how aspect means that we admit that my value is, of course, related to the product, but also to the experience, whereby the experience item is closely associated to the how perspective that we have just introduced. Is there any question and any comment? Because this is a very important point. Because if we consider that not only what, but how explains my possible competitive advantage, I have to work on how. And working on the how item means working on the marketplace, means understanding very carefully customers' behaviors, their purchase processes. So, now you understand quite clearly that this perspective, the traditional one, is limited, or at least it investigates one side of a coin, the side of what, but we have the side of how. Any further comment? Everything is clear, guys? So, it's a very important aspect, okay? So now we are fully aware of the importance of assuming a customer-centric approach and what are the implications associated to its adoption. Well, let's take an example whereby the adoption of a customer-centric perspective made the difference. And we take the example of the music industry. Well, the music industry, till 15 years ago, was a very stable and static industry. Why? Few big players, the so-called major. Each major had its own set of key singer, key artists, and as a matter of fact, since the portfolio was exclusive for each company, there was no real competition. Okay? So a quite stable life and quite good profits for these companies, since music entertainment has been always very popular in the society, and not only within you. But what happened? That the music industry was totally unprepared to the advent of the digital world. To the introduction of internet. What happened? Well, at the beginning of this millennium, Napster, were you, let me say, in a right age to remember Napster? You don't remember Napster. At the beginning of 2000, Napster introduced a system for easily sharing music. And so record labels realize that, well, how comes? I want to sell CD-ROMs. I want to sell music cassettes. How comes? And how did they react? They react launching lawsuits, trying to defend copyrights. So, asking judges, tribunals to analyze the Napster experience and so far, so forth. They lost a lot of time. And they did not achieve any results since the number of, let me say, people downloading music from Napster almost grew 3 times. But above all, it happened that a gentleman, Steve Jobs, understood everything. Did Steve Jobs introduce a new technology? No. Steve Jobs worked on how music can be listened, how an individual can get access to music. As a matter of fact, the company was at that time, in 2004-05, in the better position to take the move. The right move was Sony. Did somebody of you own a Walkman Sony? Do you know the Walkman Sony? No, too old. The Walkman Sony was a personal device where you could introduce your music cassette, and it was you could use it in mobility. But they didn't understand that the digital world was changing everything. And so Steve Jobs designed an integrated architecture matching together a distribution platform, a music distribution platform, iTunes, which was possible since Apple signed a lot of contracts with players of the music industry. And on the other hand, it introduced iPods. So new devices perfectly integrated with iTunes and being able to continuously download music and to buy single songs. So what was the key differentiating point of Steve Jobs? This one is customer-centric perspective. And throughout a deep understanding of individuals' habits to look for and listen to music, it designed an integrated architecture combining together existing technologies. Just to point out that working on how can make the difference, even if what is not really differential. So, what is the new mantra? What we have to look for. Competitive advantage is created by uncovering and reducing customer costs and risks. of course, cost and risk associated to a specific purchase process. So it's working on identifying and then reducing customer costs and risk that they can make the difference with respect to the others. So you should remember this picture. So customers can have hidden cost and risk. Usually, since they are hidden, they are not seen and discovered, but even if they are hidden, they represent a real true pain for the individual itself. So if I reduce them, if I reduce those costs and risk, I can create value. I can create value, and this value is a real determinant of my competitive advantage. Okay? So, being customer-centric means, first, understanding very carefully customer behaviors. Second, transforming such an understanding into a consistent experience. And third, being able to continuously introduce new differentiating aspects in the customer experience we deliver to our target market. In some way, what we can say is that what was in the previous century the paradigm of mass production, now it's substituted by the paradigm of mass customization. Mass customization means being able to provide unique and personalized experiences to a broad numbers of individuals. And of course, how can I manage such a complexity? Because the more customized is my proposition, the more expensive is it? Well, I can work on it exactly exploiting the properties of digital technologies. Digital technologies are usually characterized by very low marginal costs. And if I'm able to personalize my experience working on the interaction dimension, and if I fully exploit the potential of digital technologies in this respect, well, I'm quite able to manage complexity and entropy resulting from a core issue, a goal of mass customization. Is it clear? Is there any comment, guys? Great. It's a very clever classroom, this one. We wait for you next time, next year. So, the second aspect that I want to clarify, that I want to draw to your attention as far as the new strategic paradigm is concerned, is that such a customer-centric approach leads us to a further assumption. So, we are saying customer centricity makes the marketing machine a central element of a company's engine. But the marketing machine can be effective only if we assume that data and information are crucial, a crucial part of my business. That is to say that information is the new raw material of companies. So, we were saying manufacturing companies get inputs and they transform outputs. Now what we are saying is that manufacturing companies in turbulent contexts nowadays must also get data, transform them into information useful for effective strategic decision making. So, saying that the marketplace becomes the center of gravity of a company leads to consider that information is a crucial raw material of a company and above all of its marketing machine. And it's just in the light of this assumption that in some way we can understand further and new levels of competitive advantage based on the capability of collecting and managing information in order to achieve superior customer experiences. And in this respect, I introduce you the big picture approach. What does the big picture mean? The big picture means that companies can see several more things, can collect several more information, data than the single customer, than the customer can. Why companies have such a possibility? Well, because they don't interact with a single individual or a single business client. They get in touch with several different people. They have a very broad spectrum of interactions, not only with markets, with customers, but also with suppliers and other stakeholders. And for instance, this results in the possibility of grabbing something from another industry and introducing it in my industry, and this new solution for my industry can solve everything. So I can import something that I've seen elsewhere. That is to say that given this broader perspective of the company than with respect to customers, it's possible to imagine, it's possible to figure out that throughout the management of big data, of a big picture, companies can achieve a competitive advantage. What is fundamental from a company's perspective is to try to bring together different pieces of information collected throughout the marketplace or throughout the context where the company works for trying to fully understand hidden costs and hidden risk of customer. Taking into consideration that my capability of combining these pieces of information into a big picture can represent the source of my business, can be the core of my business model. As a matter of fact, over the last 2-3 years, several companies have born just in the light of their capability of collecting, processing information, and providing deep insights about the big picture of a specific marketplace. For instance, here we have a case of Bluefin Labs, an MIT startup, whose aim is to work on the Twitter sphere as far as TV programs are concerned. So they collect from the Twitter sphere pieces of information, combined together into a big picture, and the capability of managing and processing data within that big picture is the source of the company's value proposition. So, totally new businesses emerge on information management, on data management. Or, also existing businesses modify themselves just in the light of their capability to process information and data in a more effective and efficient way than in the past. A very well-known example in this respect is the example of General Electric. General Electric is a very, let me say, very powerful company, well known everywhere in the world, is a B2B conglomerate based in US and with subsidiaries and plants everywhere in the world. Let's take the example of a specific business unit of General Electric. That is the business unit producing aircraft engines. Okay? Well, how the business has been traditionally carried out by General Electric? Well, quite clear. I produce engines. I sell to airline companies engines. I don't think is anything new. What's going on now? In the light of what we are saying, so customer centricity, digital technologies that are internet, huge processing capability, cloud technologies, and so far, General Electric changed its business model. How? I do not sell an engine to you, to you, to you. I sell the service that that engine will work for a certain amount of hours per year. So General Electric servitizes itself. It transforms itself from a production company to a service company. And why General Electric decided to take such an action? Because every engine working around the world can send me to my server in cloud all the information concerning working parameters. So I collect big data. I can process and analyze this big data, and throughout such analysis, I'm able, for instance, to run predictive maintenance. I'm able to anticipate failures of the engine, and so far, so forth. So through big data, I'm able to become very effective and efficient with my customer. So here you see a very traditional company in B2B transforming itself into a service company, having the customer at the core, and using information as the core component of its renewed value proposition. Something that we could have ever imagined 10 years ago, 5 years ago. A totally new business model. And starting from this example, let's try to systematize what can be the possible sources of value working on information. Well, we can identify 3 sources of value from the big picture. I can create value relaying and connecting information. I can create value benchmarking and mirroring information. I can create value predicting. So in some way, these are 3 new levers of a company's competitive advantage, which are the direct consequence of what we have pointed out during this lecture. And let me spend some few words in trying to describe in more detail each of these 3 levers. Relaying and connecting. The idea is very simple. I take information from one location and I apply it in another one. So I use what I learned from a specific situation, and that learning is inserted into another situation. This is typically what Amazon does. The Amazon huge success is exactly due to its capability of relaying and connecting information. When the Amazon website tells you customer reviews, when Amazon reminds you that what you are looking for is similar to other products that have been bought by individuals who, at the beginning, have bought the product I'm looking for, and then bought the other products. So Amazon is working a lot on such a goal, exploiting the power of relaying and connecting data and information. benchmarking and mirroring. So try to combine information and data, allowing individuals, allowing customers to position themselves with respect to the others. It's a way to exploit data in order to fully leverage on the social and benchmarking attitude of individuals. Nike Plus is an example of benchmarking and mirroring. Why Nike Plus is an example? Well, whenever I log in Facebook, I see all the information of my peers, how long was the distance of their run, how fast they were, where did they run, and so far, so forth. And within the Nike Plus platform, you can carry out a benchmarking with my peer and a benchmarking with myself across a temporal dimension. So, benchmarking and mirroring is a huge source of value, exploiting the need of positioning myself with respect to the others. A third and final is predicting. What is predicting? Is the most sophisticated way to work on information and data. So, given a certain data set, I implement certain algorithms, certain, let me say, statistical analysis in order to infer, to predict some future phenomenon. Google Flu Trends is a relevant business case in this respect. Looking at what happens on Google related to flu, they are able to predict future epidemic diffusion of the flu itself. General Electric, introduced before, works on predicting. Predicting, for instance, the probability of an engine failure, and so far, so forth. So, what we can see is that a totally new company's architecture emerges. This does not mean that the previous approach completely loses its validity. It means that the traditional Porterian approach does not have an absolute value like in the past. And above all, in average terms, we should consider that within an environment characterized by a so relevant complexity and significant turbulence, the possibility of achieving a transient competitive advantage is more closely related to our capability of working on downstream supply chain. So, working on the marketplace dimension. Of course, such an analysis leads us to understand that we may expect in the next future that totally new players and totally new industry will emerge just in the light of these types of possibilities, just in the light of a central role played by data and information, and as a consequence of the company's capability to fully exploit the marketing machine. The next big challenge, we are in 2016, will be Internet of Things. Internet of Things will be the new disruptor in such an environment.